Hello and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor podcast with me, Marcus Cauchi. Today my guest is Roly Hirst. Roly is the CEO of Relate.us, and he has built his platforms, his agent Sandy, on the back of the trust equation, which many of you will be familiar with, that Charlie Green, Meister and Galford created. Trust equals credibility plus reliability plus intimacy over self-orientation. And today we're going to dig into what goes underneath the numerators in that equation. Before we do, Roly, could you just give us 60 to 90 seconds on your history and how you ended up developing this project?
Marcus, thanks for having me today, and I really appreciate you giving me a chance to have a conversation with you about an issue that's particularly close to your heart as well as mine. A quick 60 seconds. So I'm a financial services guy by background, over 25 years in a consultative sales type of role or an account management role. In my past life, it's what you would call a trusted advisor relationship. And I got thinking about this way back in 2013 when I was writing feedback back to CEOs and a CFO. I used to take them around to meet with investors. And a cold winter's morning in New York, and on the dining table beside me was the front page of the Wall Street Journal and an article by Bill Gates talking about that when it comes to solving the biggest problems in the world, often what is missing is good measurement and a commitment to follow the data. And that resonated with me at the time, has resonated with me ever since, and really is the core of our company. Now, I think why was that important at that particular time that I was reading is that if we think about how we measure whether we're a trusted advisor or not, and the importance of getting that right, there's a disconnect there. We all believe in how important it is to get it right, and the importance of being a trusted advisor for your bottom line in business, whether that be to attract investment, whether that be to improve engagement with your staff members, or whether that be to win more sales from your customers or reduce customer churn. It's really important to be a trusted advisor, but measuring that process of building trust has been largely subjective, third party handled, survey based. Up until this point, and it's left us with some real problems. And so we've developed a generative AI solution on the back of an opportunity, as we see it, to structurally change the way that we measure building trust with our key stakeholders.
So I want to start with a definition of trust. The way I'm defining it is it's another person's willingness to take a discretionary risk with you, either to share more, make a faster decision, involve you earlier, even though they don't have to. And you can't measure it by what they say about you in a survey. You measure it by what they do when they could stay vague, but they volunteer context. They could delay, but instead they co-create next steps. They could be feeling nervous and protect themselves, but instead they share bad news early. They could keep you at arm's length, but they introduce you sideways and upwards without being asked. In short, trust is observable in behavior under uncertainty. Would you agree with that definition?
Yeah, I would agree with that, Marcus. And I think I would just add that it's almost like you feel like you have a partner, don't you, within your customer, that it's a real partnership that you're working on. And we all try to use that word and when we're trying to open up a relationship with business representatives, and well, it's our goal to form a partnership. But to your point, whether or not I would recommend you to someone else is not the same as observing behavior around how well we're doing at building that partnership. Partnerships take time to build. So how well are we doing at building that partnership? Recommending you to someone else is not the same measure, and survey based, as you said. So it has multiple flaws, as we've observed, and left us with major problems.
Sorry to interrupt. I would maybe phrase it as being an ally rather than an adversary, which is what a lot of sellers and buyers end up in, and not being an accomplice. So if I'm an alcoholic and you invite me down the pub, you're my accomplice. And I think very often sellers have a tendency to fall into the accomplice role, not out of badness or malice, but because they're under pressure. They've got targets to hit, they've got bosses to please, and they don't really understand that an ally means that you create the conditions where the customer comes out of the goal mouth and it's you and them kicking into an open goal against their problem together.
Yeah, I think I love the sports. You went to a sports metaphor there, or a sports analogy, I should say. And I think one of the most overused and incorrectly placed sports analogy when it comes to sales and account management is playbook. What's the playbook of my team?
That's
Um,
another 3 hour conversation that we can go down.
because it says, as you imply, that my client is my customer and my client is not my ally. My customer and my client is my adversary, my opponent. And and we even have this thing called playbook sales, which is, to me, seems ridiculous. It's just not how you build partnerships with your customers and clients.
So, on that note, then, if we focus on trust and trust building, a trust playbook is not a sequence of moves. What we're trying to do is develop co-create a set of decisions about how you show up when risk appears and create an environment so that the other person feels psychologically safe to be able to open up, be vulnerable, to share information that might or could be used against them, but they do it anyway. And so killing the idea of the traditional adversarial playbook, I think, is really important. The customer is not your opponent. It's not your job to outmaneuver them or manipulate them or convince them. It's your job to empower them and facilitate the right decision that they can live with now and into the future. And they can defend it internally without taking political flack because they've made the right decision for the right reasons under the constraints of the context and the available information.
Yeah, and I would just stress, Marcus, as we've developed this platform, we keep opening up use cases that we didn't think existed before, that we weren't sure about, and that's partly because our lack of knowledge of different industries. As I said at the start, I'm a finance guy by background, but also just being in an experience with in different scenarios where you can observe what the trusted advisor, what the salesperson in the room is trying to do, and go, you know what, that is a good fit for the trust equation. And I'll share an example with you, Marcus. I never thought that someone selling me an eSIM plan within a telecommunications store would be the kind of relationship that would qualify as consultative, trying to be a trusted advisor. I had that experience in Boston last year, where I walked into an AT&T store and met a guy called Max. And my goal for the meeting was to buy an eSIM, which is about a $50 purchase. And when we had a discussion that lasted 25 to 30 minutes, but it just kept popping up for me throughout that Max was following really well the equation for the trust equation. So let's run through that. So he inquired about my accent, where I was from, what I was doing in Boston. So we established human connection outside of the task at hand. We got onto the subject, and I talked about that I wanted to buy an eSIM from him, and I'm looking for the US. And so he knew about my phone. He asked about our business and whether or not there were other plans that could potentially work. So on the credibility side, he was establishing his knowledge quite quickly. He set the agenda for the next 20 minutes we're going to have together. We're going to work through the various plans. I'm going to come onto your phone, and I'm going to make sure you leave here with an eSIM already loaded and ready to go on your phone. So the agenda was set from a reliability perspective. At no point, from a self-orientation perspective, he established curiosity up front in asking open-ended questions to me. He didn't interrupt me. He wasn't blaming anyone else. He wasn't name dropping about how Bill Gates or Warren Buffett just walked through the door yesterday and how great a salesperson I am. So all of this within 20 minutes. But here's the thing, Marcus. Towards the end of the conversation, he grew uncomfortable. And you could see it in his body language, and his shoulders started to sort of cringe up into his neck. And he told me towards the end of that conversation, he said, Riley, tomorrow you're going to get an email from my employer. And I'm not sure if I said the employer earlier, but my employer asking me how well I did. And would you mind giving me 5 stars? And I just went, oh. And I just told him what we did and what he did in the meeting that would have got him a great trust score. And he's just relaxed, and he just said, Riley, if I had that, it would be so much better for measuring what I had been hired to do. So there's an example of a scenario that we didn't think existed before we had that experience.
Well, first of all, it's lovely to hear that there are people out there who sell well, and I think there are 5 operating principles that Max probably demonstrated. And the first one is that he absorbed your risk before trying to push you to progress. So he wasn't trying to get you to make a decision fast. And because he was transparent, he surfaced uncertainty and downside and what the personal risks were before pushing you forward. So it felt safer to slow down with you than speed up without him. And trust began to form. The second thing that he seems to have done well is protect context and not try to extract information like a dentist doing a molar removal. People are testing trust by watching what you do with what they didn't have to tell you. And he was sensitive about how he managed the information that you gave him. He didn't weaponize it. Um, and he wasn't trying to rescue you. He was not trying to fix your discomfort, but he was present inside your tension because you do a lot of travel. You want to stay connected, and being disconnected creates all sorts of problems, not only for you, but for the people who work with you, for customers, partners, and so on. And so he made the problems discussable instead of trying to smooth them over. And I'm guessing he was probably quite open about the different types of plan and what the pros and cons were of each. So instead of rescuing and becoming an accomplice, he stayed with the problem and made you his ally. And then he helped you not lose before helping you win, which again is something that very few sellers do well. So when you help someone not lose, they'll invite you to help them win down the road. So even if you hadn't bought then, I'm guessing when you're back in Boston and you're looking for anything to do with your mobile, you're going back to that shop and you're going looking for Max.
Yeah, took the words out of my mouth, Marcus. Guess who I'm going to see? Guess who I'm going to go see when I go to Boston on anything to do phone related.
And the fifth part is he stays the same under pressure. So trust is decided when things start to wobble. Allies stay calm, curious, and low ego, even when timelines slip or stakes rise. So his behavior didn't change. Well, it changed a little bit when he was getting nervous about getting the 5-star review because of the context of what that meant for him, but also the cringeworthy embarrassment of having an NPS score request, which he knows will cause trust to collapse. So he got ahead of it, and I think, if you are building what one would loosely term an ally playbook, it isn't about what you do next. It's about what not to do when risk shows up. And it's like more of an anti-playbook.
Yeah, yeah. I look forward to the day that playbook's taken out of the any conversation around consultative style sales. Yeah, and that's any opportunity you have for more than 5 minutes. You are really are trying to build a relationship, and so it doesn't really qualify for when I'm walking into a fast food restaurant and ordering a meal. That's a different kind of sales relationship.
So where do you most often see from the data? Where do you most often see sellers crossing the line from ally into accomplice? And what are the first behavioral signals that give it away?
Yeah, so usually where we typically see, I think the beauty of the trust equation is that it's great for observing red flags straight away, but also decay over time because it's a standardized measure of trust. So red flag, and the way that in their wisdom, Meister Green and Galford constructed it, self-orientation as a denominator has the highest um, impact on the overall score for trust. And so that point of where you shift from ally into accomplice, those initial red flags are mainly impacted by what you're doing in self-orientation. So if you get into an argument, for example, in a meeting where you shift from, let's take it to an extreme, from ally to adversary, then you are probably interrupting the person who you're meeting with. You're probably blaming other people for the error, not yourself, not taking it on yourself. You might be name dropping about how good a salesperson you are because someone loves you who's out of context. You're probably moving into spin. So rather than asking open-ended questions and being curious, you're just trying to appear smart and be long-winded. And so all of this negatively impacts your self-orientation score. So self-orientation score goes up. And because you're not being curious, self-orientation score continues to go up. You're probably also seeing initially quite a low intimacy score because you're not trying to, you've forgotten about the human connection component. You're not actively listening to your client. You're not showing empathy because you're in an argument. And you probably stop naming them and just gone straight into defensive mode. So yeah, they're the initial. That's the red flag that you would see a higher self-orientation score, lower intimacy.
So when we see these signals, and if you were coaching a manager, for example, um, what would you invite them to not coach, because I think we need to look at the flip side of this as well. Because I think if you're BANT or medic or spin trained, um, odds are you're going to be going into trying to make the sale, make the transaction happen, push it. So let's look at the antithesis of bad management. And what can we encourage managers to stop coaching?
Yeah, so I think let's say that the vast majority of managers out there don't have access to objective measurement of this equation. And so the question really is, what are they doing with the bad measurement they have today, or the measurement that's available today? So they're not in the trust equation. What are they doing that if they were following the trust equation, they wouldn't be doing? And it's quite plain to see that the metrics are really tailored towards credibility and reliability. So those meeting notes that we take in meeting and enter into a CRM, or even the transcripts now, where we're just taking summaries of the transcripts and entering in, the managers are really asking about, well, did you talk about this key selling feature of a product, or did you get through that playbook? Sorry to bring that terminology back in, but did you get through all the key selling points of our playbook? Hey, you entered, from a reliability perspective, it would be limited to, hey, you entered into a CRM that you were going to introduce them to a product expert. Have you done that yet? And so really, they're not spending much time or with the metrics that they have focused on how effective their representative is in meetings, particularly as it relates to building that allegiance, as you say, building the ally within the client or the customer, really establishing things like human connection, really showing active listening, getting that ally to open up and explain more about their own ambitions, but also the ambitions of the firm. So learning things, you just providing that safety that you talk about for the ally within the firm to share knowledge that will lead to either a deal more quickly or a bigger and better deal, and a bigger and better relationship.
Well, I think it is probably appropriate to look at how classically trained sellers are misusing these moments as well. So if I look at people who've been trained, for example, in Challenger, the claim is that you're challenging the buyer's thinking. However, it normally or very often becomes intellectual dominance under pressure. So, just as you described, the seller talks more, interrupts sooner, and pushes their insight harder. And you're not really challenging the buyer, you're trying to defend your own relevance. And so your self orientation spikes, your intimacy collapses, and compliance replaces trust. If you're BANT trained, the claim again is to qualify their seriousness. But what you do immediately is signal mistrust. And you're trying to convince yourself that you are worthy of my time. And therefore, what the impact is on trust is buyers are going to withhold context and disclosure drops before it starts. I look at Medic. And again, this is, makes the claim to manage complexity, but it turns people into nodes. And so you're power mapping without permission. Budget questions come before safety, and the impact on trust is buyers feel, MRI scan, like, being at the airport and the border control seeing you naked, and not supported. And the real risk stays hidden. With spin, the claim is to discover your needs, but it devolves into a scripted, Gestapo interrogation. And the questions are used to steer, not understand. And as a result, buyers give you narrow, clipped answers and voluntary disclosure stops. And even with Sandler, the claim is mutual qualification, but it just becomes psychological judo, and it becomes pain induced or pain induction instead of surfacing pain. And you get polite compliance, and the relationship turns procedural. So the common failure pattern is pressure rises, control increases, curiosity drops, sellers protect themselves, and then they call it professionalism. When what you're trying to do is understand where the deal is wobbling. Do you understand more, or do you steer harder? And it's not the framework failing, it worked exactly as it was designed to do. So constrain your close. If your process requires compliance before trust, you're managing exposure, you're not building allies. And exposure management never creates trust.
Hmm. Yeah, I think we're singing to the same tune here, Marcus. That I agree with your sentiments wholeheartedly.
Well, how do we use frameworks after intimacy, not to create it, so that they're diagnostic? And how do we use the platform, to use Sandy, in order to help us diagnose our own performance so that we can improve?
So I think it's really important to understand that Sandy has so Sandy, just so for your listeners are aware, Sandy's our generative AI analyst that measures Maester-Green and Galford's trust equation, measures it at speed. So we're talking about near-time or real-time metrics, similar to what you'd see from daily sales numbers or your share price moving up and down. This is the power we have now with generative AI to finally measure what really matters in business, the strength of our relationships objectively at speed. And because we can measure it objectively, which is standardized measurement, we can measure it over time. But at speed as well means that we can coach improvement based off perspective as opposed to perception. So that gives hopefully that gives your listeners some background as to what Sandy is, what it does. The importance of Sandy is that it's used by individuals, as you alluded to help improve their own knowledge or awareness of themselves in terms of being a trusted advisor. And let's be frank, that need to improve awareness of whether you are at the top of your game, even if you are at the top of your game, across most sports games, you are still getting coached. So even if you are at the top of your tennis game, you are still getting pointers on how to improve. If you're at the top of your golf mat game, you're still getting pointers on how to improve. So, or at the very least, you are demonstrating to everyone else to a standard how good you are and the effectively the standard that everyone else needs to get to, which also has its benefit because it reduces the amount of time that you are mentoring other people within your firm or that you're chaperoning other people within your firm out to see customers. So there's a personal improvement element to Sandy that users keep very close to them. And it's really interesting, Marcus, and I apologize for giving a long-winded answer here, but I'm probably explaining more about what Sandy does than answering your question directly. But I think it's just important to observation that people personify Sandy very quickly. And I'm very careful not to give Sandy call Sandy a he or she, but people start calling Sandy he or she very quickly, which is great. We love to see it because it means that you're bonding with a coach, and that coach, you realize very quickly that this coach is going to deliver something you've never had before, is that perspective on just little things you can do to improve coming out of a meeting. So that's the relationship at an individual level, but of course every meeting is measured to the same standard. So it also has application across a firm. Whether that be in a sales, your broader sales team, whether it be for sales team leadership, whether it be over in account management, whether it be in HR, IR, whether it be in project management internally, product line management. What we're trying to achieve in terms of building trust is something that we apply to our stakeholders, not just to our customers. So stakeholders are customers, investors, and our own staff, our own team, building trust
And
with our
partners.
own team, and our partners. Yeah. So that's the broader application of what Sandy does. Importantly, Sandy is measuring to the standard across 55 sub-factors behind that equation, and it's doing it the same way in every meeting. So it picks up on trends, and so after those first 5 meetings or so that you have, it's identifying little areas that you can just incrementally improve. So I can share with you examples where Sandy keeps working on me in terms of where I can improve. So being in curiosity, Sandy keeps focusing on just being a little bit more curious coming out of most meetings. And then when I am in a meeting and we're designating tasks to ensure that there's clear ownership of those tasks coming out of a meeting. So I'm more on the reliability side. I can tell you, I can go into examples of how I adapt to different kinds of meetings. But I think I'll spend enough time trying to answer that question.
Well, I'd be
Yeah.
curious. What would Sandy diagnose watching this conversation about my performance? So what do you think Sandy would say?
Well, so far, we haven't established the human connection up front. So, but again, this is not necessarily a trusted advisor type conversation, but it's interesting that Sandy would have been looking for that human connection. That would have been involved me talking about my kids or my favorite sport or something where we share where a sport, a plan of. But in terms of you actively listening, asking open-ended questions, you're scoring very high on that component. No interruption, no name dropping, so your self-orientation scores very well. So To summarize it quite quickly, Marcus, you're doing pretty well so far, sir.
Okay. I thought I was interrupting too much and taking up too much of the
you,
conversation, but
you said sorry for the interruption once. And can I share a story on that?
please.
It's really interesting. So in the first 30 days of working with Sandy, what we typically observe is that people try and gamify this new coach. I've got this new relationship I'm helping, but I'm going to improve my trust scores. I'm going to gamify. I'm going to beat the coach. And initially, when I first thought about that word and its association with Sandy, I was fearful. I thought that people are going to work out a way to crack the code or crack the coach, similar to the way we've all cracked the code on MPS and CSAT. That's easy to manipulate, and I just gave you an example of that, of how that can be manipulated earlier. But so I had that fear, and then it quickly dawned on me that the way to get your trust scores up is to change your behavior in meetings and to think about the people that you're meeting with differently, whether that be a customer or stuff, and focus on what Sandy's looking for and who wins in that scenario. Your customer does, and ultimately you do, because a customer opens up and shares more of their goals, what the aspirations of the firm are. They think of you as that reliable partner. Quite frankly, and if we're looking relative to the example we've already shared, they start to think of you like Max at the telco store in Boston. They're going to come back to you. So customer wins, and then ultimately you win. So that gamification was positive. But to share with you my story, which I was going to, after about in that 30 to 60 day window, you then start to observe the people who you meet with differently as well, because you're picking up on all the sub factors where you're trying to improve. But if someone you're meeting with displays those same weaknesses, or displays weaknesses that Sandy would hammer you on if you were doing it, starts to set off some red flags. So I met with a potential investor once who said sorry for the interruption and then would proceed to interrupt, but not once like you've done in this meeting, just once, every couple of minutes. So 7, 8, 9 times, 10 times through the meeting. So in his mind, he'd developed this motor skill over many years that would soften the impact of the interruption. And that in his mind would mean that, therefore I'm not really interrupting because I've apologized for it up front. But if Sandy were in that room measuring what he was up to, and Sandy would smash him on self-orientation at the end of that meeting because he just continued to interrupt throughout the meeting. And I walked away from that relationship straight afterwards. Just went, I don't think I can work with this guy because the red flags are just going off.
That's an example of stealing permission. It's not doing it with consent. And so I'm really curious, what's the one bit of feedback that consistently is given by Sandy that people tend to push back against the most or feel most uncomfortable about?
It can be a range of things, because Marcus, the best way to describe it is you have to think about it as every meeting's different. So, and it's how we adapt in different meetings. Some meetings go for 30 minutes, some meetings go for 60 minutes, some meetings go for 10 or 15. Some meetings, the client just wants you to talk to a presentation, or some meetings there's conflict, some meetings it's very open. So what it consistently, more than anything else, that gets users just immediately thinking about their result is when there's been a change in meeting type. They haven't done that kind of meeting for a while, and they've been put into a certain scenario, how they adapted in that certain scenario. Can I give you another example?
Please.
Yeah. So another investor meeting. I walked into a meeting where it was with an investor, and left that meeting at the end of it, and with a feeling that's quite common for all of us. We've all had this. We've been in a sales role where I felt like I lost them. I felt like I lost the individual who I was meeting with at some point, and I don't know where it was, because I was focusing on so many things and trying to get conversation going. And so I couldn't put my finger on it, but Sandy could. After the meeting, Sandy knew exactly what was wrong and was confronting for me, and it led to a quick change in how I think about it. So during the meeting, the presenter asked me to talk to my presentation and just run through the slides, and I don't like doing that. I've never liked doing that. And because this was a prospective investor, and I was trying to maintain a warm environment, I did that. And I started working through my slides, and I wasn't pausing for questions, and I wasn't being curious. I wasn't trying to stoke conversation, and therefore instead what I was doing was rambling on from slide to slide and sent him to sleep. And so Sandy was very clear on where I went wrong. And what was confronting about that straight afterwards, and I've never done it since, is that when someone asked me to talk to a presentation, I'm quite open with them, saying, look, I'm going to go out on a risk here, but this is not my favorite thing to do. Can we just work through the slides and have a conversation rather than me just working through the slides and pausing for Q&A at the end? So it led to behavioral change very quickly from my perspective. Another example is that in meetings that are better suited for 30 minutes. So if I was doing a demo when I'm doing a demo of our platform, typically I'm quite comfortable in doing that in less than 30 minutes. When I get asked to do that over a 60-minute period, my trust score is impacted because I haven't done enough practice, I have enough prep. And what I tend to do is to go into longer winded answers and rambling more and not maintaining those level of active listening and curiosity, asking open-ended questions. And so it shows up, and I need to try and rethink my strategy for a 60-minute meeting, or just not have a 60-minute meeting, try and keep it down to 30 minutes. So it's confronting when you think about how you adapt. Confronting is not the right word. It's an incredible awareness raising when you're thinking about how different meetings are and how you adapt in different meetings.
Well, I think that's very pertinent because self-awareness isn't just understanding how you feel in a given context. It's understanding how people reflect back, how you project out, and how you make them feel, and being aware of the impact you have. And I think very often what I see when I'm coaching salespeople and going through calls with them is that they try and reduce the other person's discomfort before they've even understood its cause. And by doing that, they diminish the real issue. And so the other person doesn't feel felt, doesn't feel heard, and definitely doesn't feel understood. And an ally helps someone to think. An accomplice helps them feel better briefly. And I think that rescuing is one of the things I'm most excited about with Sandy, because it will pick up on that and it will recognize when you're helping them to reduce their risk, not yours, and stay out of the accomplice mode where you're speeding up your outcome at the expense of the buyer's safety or the other person's safety, and definitely to stay out of the adversarial position where you're competing against the other person's uncertainty.
Yeah.
And I think those are really critical. And you don't generally get that unless you've got someone else to coach with you or you're very self-aware. And let's be honest, we're not terribly self-aware as a species. So I think the timing for something like this is really key.
We talked to a stat PwC came up with a couple of years ago, and those examples that I've given you make me realize that for 20 years I'm part of this statistic. And so I'm not talking to you as someone who's new to the business of sales or account management or investor relations. I've been doing it for over 20 years, and I'm open with you about these mistakes or that I'm making and how poorly I adapt in certain scenarios. And so I'm part of the statistic that I'm about to share with you, and that is that over 90% of customer-facing representatives from business believe they're a trusted advisor. And I would certainly have felt that in my prior role, and would have certainly felt that up until I started working with Sandy. But here's the problem. You go and ask your customers whether they believe that the representatives representing your business are trusted, and only 30% believe that they are a trusted advisor. So there's a big disconnect. And I'm not saying and where I point my finger here is it's the absence of good measurement, that we've never had good measurement around the process of building trust that is objective and can be done at speed, and where improvement can be coached based off standardized measurement until the emergence of generative AI and what we can do now.
I've got an interesting thought experiment. You gave me some very flattering feedback. So what would tell me, no, what would Sandy tell me would make my score worse in the next 5 minutes? And what should I avoid doing now so that we can see the contrast?
Okay, if you started name dropping about, let's say, the King of England and how you're good mates, or
Unlikely as a Republican.
that would certainly tick your self-orientation score up. If you started saying sorry for the interruption and interrupting me a lot more frequently than what you have, then that would tick your self-orientation score up. I think we didn't set an agenda at the start of this meeting, but if we were nowhere close to addressing that agenda by the end of this meeting, then Sandy would have words with you afterwards from a reliability perspective. I think you've baked in some really strong scores around credibility, so I think you're good there, Marcus.
Yeah,
The only thing I can think of there is if you were, yeah, I mean, you're very articulate in sharing your point of view, so I think you're pretty much baked in a good score there. And then from an intimacy perspective, if you were, if we weren't laughing or opening or sharing openness, if it just you were looking to end this meeting very quickly, and no matter how curious I was, you were sorry, and no matter what I wanted to talk about, you just kept shutting down the conversation and just wanting to end, then I think that would impact your intimacy scores.
excellent. Well, in fairness, I think we've already got an existing relationship and we've had several conversations. So this would be like a second or a third meeting rather than a first. And again, I'm interested, you talk about how trust can be measured over time.
Hmm.
How does the way the AI behave differently when it knows it's a second, a third, or a final meeting?
Yeah, that's so if you go from your initial meeting with a representative to, so let's take that example with Max that we used in the communication store in Boston. And next time I go in to meet with Max, uh, he's got more to go on next time we meet. So he's got a trust score to build on from the first time we met. If you think about the reliability component, particularly if Max had left me with, oh, by the next time we meet, I'm going to have introduced you to my boss, introduced you to, or an expert in a particular field that you were interested in. I'm going to send you some more information about this product that we have. Max would be wise to remind me of all of that work that he's done for me in between, because that would bake in his higher reliability score, because he's demonstrating that he's accountable for promises he made in follow-up and promises he made in follow-up, and of course then he sets the agenda for the next meeting. From a reliability perspective, he can build on it. It is important in that initial meeting, Marcus, for him to set that follow-up, to sort of lay out the plan of what I'm going to do for you. But just in that next meeting, you're effectively working through everything I've done for you. So that's from a reliability perspective. If he knows more about my role, he should know more about my what my goals are and the goals of my business. He would have prepared again in that second meeting from a credibility perspective to be more fine-tuned on terms of maybe with some updates of acknowledging the updates that had happened within my own business. So he's got information to build on, and from an intimacy perspective, we probably spoke. Well, I told him I was from Australia, so we'd probably speak a little bit more about cricket team or some sort of sports from that perspective.
Is there an American who knows anything about cricket?
Yeah. So you would expect to see Sandy's looking for that in the second meeting. So it's not like you're going to get automatically higher scores, but Sandy's been more critical for those the second meeting, third meeting observations over the first meetings. It mainly impacts in the numerator scores.
So we're coming to the top of the hour now. What I'd like to do is maybe get under the surface a little bit. You've told me in the past that there are 55 sub-factors that go under the four numerators. Could you elaborate with some ideas of what those are?
Yeah, the three numerators and the denominator, so there's 55 behind that. So if we look at curiosity, there's about 15 or so that are there, and that includes showing that you've done your meeting preparation, so understanding who you're meeting with, what their role is, what the goals of their company are. When you're expressing your point of view, you're doing it in an articulate manner. If you are talking to a presentation, you're being relaxed while you're talking to that presentation. You're constantly asking for audience feedback throughout it. You've been quite humble as well, so there's an element of humility there. You're even looking at things that may not have come across as credible, but I'll save that one for a bit later, because I just want to make sure I'm answering your questions properly. So in reliability, we talked about the establishment of an agenda, getting through that agenda, committing yourself to follow-ups, reminding of all the work you've done prior, as examples within reliability. In intimacy, it's really driving at openness. So give an example, tone of language that you're using, whether you're using what kind of language you're using, whether it's got a familiar language for the people you're talking to. We talked about talking about stuff that's off topic, establishing that human connection, but then showing things like empathy, being empathetic towards your ally, celebrating their wins that they've done recently. You're naming them all the time in your conversation. So if you think about Marcus, we've both been pretty good at talking about our names through that, but that's important as well. That
You more than me.
And then asking sharing personal stories, asking personal questions that we talked about a little bit earlier. And from a self-orientation perspective, we talked about things you don't do. So there's a mix in self-orientation of stuff you don't do and stuff that you do. And the stuff that you don't do is blaming other people, name dropping out of context, interrupting, spin, appearing smart, trying to problem solve too soon are examples of things that you don't do. And on the flip side of things, self-deprecation is a good thing to do. Being curious is the most important within that, with the positive things they're doing. Expressing fear, so being comfortable enough to say, I fear this might be wrong or this might be right, but so you're showing that as well. So yeah, that gives you a few examples across the.
Well, let's put you on the spot a little bit and invite some vulnerability here. I'd be really curious if you can think of a series of conversations with the same person, maybe over 3 or 4 meetings, and how Sandy's advice evolved over those 3 meetings. And so we can get a sense of the progression and continuity that's possible with a tool like this.
I'll be somewhat vulnerable here. My natural instinct is to be slightly shy, and that's not necessarily a great thing. That's not necessarily a great quality to have when you're trying to establish a relationship. So I have to continually remind myself now of what Sandy is looking for in the lead up to the meeting and the work that I do in the lead up to that meeting. But there are certain things, for example, that I've missed. So I've had an example in the past where in the first meeting, I've been slightly late to the meeting, coming out of one meeting into the next, and I've skipped over that human connection component. And Sandy at the end of that meeting was critical is not the right word, because Sandy's a coach. So Sandy was heavily coaching me on that element of it. And I knew straight away after the meeting that I didn't make that human connection in that first meeting. So the first thing I did straight after that meeting was apologize, saying, look, I'd love to learn more about you. I didn't feel like I got to learn more about you in that meeting. Let's make that a priority for the next time that we meet. And sure enough, 10 days later, we had a second follow-up meeting, and I was straight into focusing on those intimacy scores, and I got to learn a lot about my ally within and much more successful. At the same time, I knew going into that second meeting that I had to, that I'd made a mistake in that first one, and I was trying to rescue the ally, as you put it. And so therefore, I better make sure that all of my other numerator scores are really strong. So I've got to make sure I've done my credibility work. I've got to make sure that I've done everything that I said that I would do in between meetings. And so when it got into that, and we got through the intimacy component, I had the opportunity to build on that by reminding the individual of the work that I had done for them in between the meetings, and some more industry knowledge that I brought after our first meeting. So that gives you an idea of the progress. And then, my trust scores went up coming out of that second meeting, and I could build on it again going into my third meeting. And I think some of you may not, I think in this example, it wasn't really until that second meeting and into the third where the openness really showed up. It's not like the ally is going to be an ally right from the start. That typically only ever comes if I'm being introduced by a colleague or someone who is dear to both of us, where they would be more open with me than normal from the start. That doesn't really exist when you are speaking to someone for the first time who hasn't been warmly introduced by a mutual colleague.
Excellent. Okay, well that certainly illustrates the
What
point.
do you think when you say in a meeting, I don't know, as an answer to a question that someone's
It's a brilliant answer.
is that positive for credibility or negative for credibility?
Well, personally, I think it's positive because it's being vulnerable. And the Latin root of the word vulnerable is vulnerabilis, which means to make yourself woundable, put yourself in harm's way, and do it anyway. It's a sign of courage. And it's certainly more believable than bullshit.
Yes. Yeah. There's another one within self-orientation, which is also positive, which is very similar. And Noelle's great at saying this. I love it what she said. I'm just thinking out aloud here.
Yeah.
And it's a positive for.
I could be wrong.
I could be wrong. I'm going to think out aloud, because it shows that you are working the problem with the ally in the room. It shows that you are working together in this conversation. So that's another one that can be read differently.
Well, one of the things that we've spent the last few years evolving is the build your own statement of work concept. And if you don't have the buyer's voice, their fingerprints, their ideas all over your proposal, it's just a work of fiction written by an author. Your job when it comes to writing a proposal is to be a scribe. You can co-create it, but it has to be their words, it has to be their vision, it has to be their outcome, and the job to be done that they are renting from you. If it's anything else, it's going to end up in the round file. And when you look at the failure rates of commits, 80% of commits end up with closed lost, no decision, or closed lost. Now, that means forecasting, frankly, is shit. 30% of salespeople last year hit quota, which means 70% didn't. When we see all this evidence, we've got to start asking some better questions. And one of which is, how could we be wrong? And go looking for the bad news. The beauty of an asset like Sandy, in my mind, is that it's showing you the bad news. Run to the sound of gunfire. Welcome something like this so that you can learn from it instead of doubling down on idiocy.
Yeah. And I think the important thing, Marcus, is it's not like we have once had good measurement and now we don't. We just haven't had good measurement around what you're talking about until the emergence of generative AI. And the way I think about it, the way I explain it is, I ask your listeners to consider it this way. If Sandy was to deliver you a report 4 years ago or 3 years ago, how long would that take and what would it look like? And the answer is, the transcript would have existed back then. We've been transcripting conversations and recording conversations for decades. So that's not new. The answer is that it would have been a human who would analyze a transcript from that meeting and get you an answer back to you within by the end of next week at a cost to us of $600 to $700 US dollars. And now we're talking about processing power of intelligence equivalent to a financial analyst or an analyst in a matter of seconds. So I can get it to you within 2 minutes at a cost of 6 cents. And so the opportunity to measure and improve measurement, particularly in these fields that really matter in business, has only just emerged for us in the last 2 to 3 years. It's why we say that we are in really the first or second innings of a baseball match when it comes to generative AI. But it's also, it's one of the main reasons why we believe as a firm that the generative AI is an empowerer of humans, and that it can measure human attributes, human behavior like never before. And the changes that are going to come from that, the productivity uplift that's going to come from that, are just enormous. Gallup estimated that if we can improve employee engagement by providing meaningful feedback on what matters and building trust with these stakeholders, whether that be external or internal, really matters. But being able to do that frequently would lift engagement from 20% or globally to 80%. And that's an $8.5 trillion productivity uplift.
That's trillion with a T.
Trillion
in
with
case
a T.
anyone missed it. So that's how
Yeah.
many zeros? Is that 9 or 12?
It's 12, I think. Yeah. So it's
Wow.
or north of 10% of global GDP, which is what Satya Nadella challenged us to think about the impact of generative AI as a plus 10% GDP story. And so we can see that just within relationships, that kind of uplift. This blows my mind at the opportunity that now lays before us, the opportunity for us all to be more effective at building relationships using better measurement.
Brilliant. I mean, those numbers are staggering. Really, unfortunately, we've come to time. If you had a golden ticket and you could go back and whisper in the ear of the idiot Rowley, age 23, 24, what one choice bit of advice would you have given him that undoubtedly he would have ignored?
Oh, I don't even have to go back that far. I could go back 5 years, but going back to the 23, 24-year-old, I would have, in learning today, I would have just reminded that 23 or 24-year-old who's starting out in business how important it is, even at that age, to focus on establishing not just trust with your customers, but with you internally, and the importance of managing up and managing but also in the process of managing up, make sure that you are always positioning yourself as an agent of change. You are the driver of change. No matter what age you are within a firm, you can be the entrepreneur that drives change. So as a 23-year-old, I probably would have ignored that and just gone out for thinking that taking my customers out for beers was the way to build great relationships. But that's what I would have whispered into my ear.
Excellent. Rolly, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic episode, packed full of useful insight. I'm just going to summarize what I think we've covered today. And if there's anything that you believe that I've missed, please jump in. If there's one takeaway from this conversation, it's this. Trust isn't something you ask for. Isn't something you declare. It's something the other person gifts you. And they do so quietly, not through a big show, but through their behavior, especially when there's a risk on the table. And what we've explored today is that trust most breaks down, not when objections or delays or churn are around, but it starts earlier than that, when the pressure rises and we unconsciously shift from ally to accomplice, or worse, into adversary. And the triggers are self-orientation spiking, curiosity dropping, and context disappears long before anyone says no. And the opportunity now, with better measurement and better awareness and working on your own self-awareness, isn't to perfect a playbook, but to notice ourselves under pressure and choose differently. So help people think, not comply. Absorb risk before we ask them to move, and to stay the same when things wobble. Because trust isn't built by what you do next. It's built by what you don't do when it matters most. I think that's a fair summary. Have you anything to add?
I think I'd add there, Marcus, is just this predictive analytics like we've never had before around. You mentioned at the start that there are so many signals ahead of that customer churn when the customer leaves the table that we just haven't been measuring, and now that we can. And it goes beyond customer churn. It also includes staff attrition. It includes, and then when you're thinking about invested capital, it enables us to better predict the period between when you invest that capital and when you can start meaningfully measure the return. So that can be 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years on projects or hiring new people before you can meaningfully measure the return on invested capital. So it's an incredibly powerful measurement solution. I think that we would both. I'm going to take a risk here, Marcus, and I think that we would both agree on
I think so.
that.
Rolly Hirst, thank you.
Wonderful to spend time with you, Marcus. Thank you.
Likewise. So in my mind, this episode will resonate if you spend your days in complex, high stakes conversations. If that's you, I'd genuinely like to hear what landed. We've left several threads deliberately unfinished. So if you've got questions around those, get in touch with me or Rolly. But also engage with your manager and see how they coach trust under pressure. Because in future, when I have Rolly back, we'll keep pulling on those elements. And so if this conversation really stuck with you, don't rush to agree or disagree. Spend the next few days really paying attention. Notice when curiosity drops. Notice when you try to rescue. And if you catch a moment where trust shifted, I'd be genuinely interested in what you saw. In the meantime, stay safe and happy selling. Bye-bye.